For centuries, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that made up what we now call England were dogged by divisions and infighting, and would remain so until the time of Alfred the Great in the late ninth century. Until that time, political turmoil and rivalry was rife. This was evidenced in 757 when King Siegbert of Wessex was overthrown by a man named Cynewulf, who, like Siegbert, had blood ties to the ancient kings of Wessex. Evidently, there was plenty of support for Cynewulf's coup, as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle states that Cynewulf and the councillors of Wessex deprived Siegbert of his kingdom. The fact that Cynewulf had the support of the leading men of Wessex seems to be evidence enough that his cause was justified. The reason for Siegbert's overthrow is given by the Anglo-Saxon chronicles as being because of Siegbert's unlawful or unjust actions. A clue as to Siegbert's behaviour as king presents itself after his deposition. In an age where rivals may be expected to have been removed violently, Cynewulf not only permitted Siegbert to live, but also allowed him control over Hampshire. That was until Siegbert killed an ealdorman named Cumbra, who had stayed with Siegbert the longest. The unjust killing of a loyal friend was enough reason for Cynewulf to march against Siegbert, forcing him to flee for his life. Siegbert knew he was a wanted man, but against the odds, he held out against King Seinwolf until he was stabbed to death by a herdsman who, it was said, sought revenge for the death of Cumbra. Like most kings of the time, Cynewulf certainly hoped to expand his kingdom and power, but in the neighbouring kingdom of Mercia, a king of great strength would rise to prominence. This was King Offa of Offa's Dyke fame. In 779, Offa and Cynewulf would clash at the Battle of Bensington, which would be described by the later chronicler Florence of Worcester as a desperate affair. From that we can deduce that Cynewulf at the very least held his own in the battle, but was ultimately bested by Offa, who became, without question, the most powerful English ruler of the 8th century. Being defeated by Offa was no disgrace, but Cynewulf also had other concerns. Cynherd, the brother of Siegbert, remained alive and in Cynewulf's kingdom. He was a natural concern to the king, with his ties to the crown and with obvious motives for revenge against Cynewulf. As Cynewulf prepared to banish his enemy from his kingdom, Cynherd spotted an unexpected opportunity. Cynewulf was paying a visit to one of his mistresses, accompanied, it was said, by only a few attendants in a place called Merton. Learning of the king's whereabouts, Cynherd marched through the night and had the king surrounded as he slept. Roused from his sleep, Cynewulf seized his sword and prepared to fight for his life and crown. He dashed towards the man who now plotted against him, and gave Cynherd a terrible wound. But Cynewulf, with his own men yet unaware of his predicament, was hopelessly outnumbered, and Cynherd's forces brutally cut him down. On hearing the disturbances, the king's men finally burst into life, but on seeing they were too late, they turned their attention to Cynherd himself. Cynherd attempted to win their favour with bribery, but these offers were angrily rejected by the royal forces, and chaos continued well into the following morning, when eventually Cynherd and 84 of his supporters were also hacked to death, whilst Cynherd's son, described by Florence of Worcester as being only a little child, was also terribly wounded in the fighting. Thus Cynewulf's life came to an end. Whilst his life, like most early English kings, is, in the main, mysterious and largely unknown, we know enough to realise that his story was an interesting one. A contemporary and rival of the great Offa of Mercia, Cynewulf was typically ambitious and more than ready for battle. But I can also see some other qualities in him as well. He seems to have been a king prepared to avoid bloodshed and seek more merciful punishments. His usurpation of Siegbert was justified, and the fact he had the loyalty of the key men of Wessex is also highly telling of Cynewulf's character. But he also did not put his rival to death. Instead, he allowed him to live and retain some semblance of power. And it was only after Siegbert showed a complete lack of remorse for his earlier crimes and committed the foul murder of Cumbra that Cynewulf felt obliged to act against him. Even with Seinherd, Cynewulf tried to take the merciful route of banishment, despite the fact that it was evident that the former was a great threat to him, as Seinherd eventually proved. Cynewulf would be laid to rest at Winchester after his murder in 786. Will he be ranked among the greatest of English kings? No, but his story has been very much worth telling.